everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good morning, Rush Nation. Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Show of the Ages. Good morning, Fantasy Football. Now, week one is almost in the books. Just one game tonight, and we are getting ready to kick off in style our Waiver Wire week 2. And week 1 was incredible, right? It was phenomenal. There'll be some people who will be a bit grouchy and a bit sad this morning, but spare thought for the NFL in Germany, who have to watch the Giants and the Panthers in a few weeks' time. That is definitely going to be a really, really difficult one for them to watch. So, if you just think things can't get that bad, then you do have, you do have that to look forward to. Right, we're going to get into some waiver wire pickups for this week, and there's definitely a lot of talking points. A lot of players you need to keep an eye on the waiver wire for this week. So we're going to start off, first of all, at the quarterback position. There really is only one or two to talk about here. They're not, they're not players that you need to necessarily be focused on exclusively. The quarterback position, like, I guess the thing is, don't panic. Don't panic about week 1. You don't need to worry so much about it because there were a lot of abject performances, but it's still preseason for a lot of these players, and you need to be a little bit mindful of that. But there was one player in particular who looked absolutely phenomenal yesterday. That was Baker Mayfield. He is 34% owned. So he is out there in a lot of leagues. And if you are a bit concerned about your rookie QB that you've taken, then absolutely Baker Mayfield is one to own. That offense just looks so much better this year. Liam Cohen and his tutelage is definitely schemed a much better offense. 4 touchdowns, nearly a 150 passer rating. And, he just looked really, really good. To be honest, there was more in there. They managed this game really well. They were ahead by a couple of scores the whole way. And they definitely, I don't want to say took the foot off the gas because he still scored late to put up the 37 points. But they definitely sort of managed this game. There's more, and they're going to have Detroit soon. Believe that's next week, and that's definitely going to make it a real test. But for me, Baker Mayfield is a player that should be rostered in a lot more leagues than he is. If you're struggling for a quarterback outside that, Geno Smith is 14.6%. I mean, he didn't look brilliant yesterday, but he's still a relatively good option out there. A sort of wild outside bet is Justin Fields. I'm not sure he necessarily holds the job. I don't think he was. People are wax lyrical about Justin Fields and what was, I think, a pretty average performance. But he didn't turn the football over, and he did complete a high percentage of passes. And they look like they're going to take away some of that rushing threat in order to sort of keep him protected. So we'll see what the week goes. But he's a player that should be on people's radars and probably should be added a little bit more than he is. Moving on to the running back position, there's definitely a few running backs that we can talk about in scheme here and players to keep an eye on. The first ones to sort of be aware of are Tanks Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Bigsby's only owned in 4.6% of leagues, and he definitely had quite a significant 50-50 share with ETN. ETN got more of the passing role. Now, I don't think Bigsby's someone that is going to be an absolute spectacular, but if something happens to ETN, misses time, Bigsby's definitely going to be the guy that fills that hole. But Bigsby also looks like, 12 carries. You can't ignore that. He had the same amount as ETN. He also had 73 yards on those 12 carries. So he looked pretty good as well. Jacksonville will be a good offense. I don't know what happened in the second half to Jacksonville yesterday. They absolutely stunk the place up. But that first half, they definitely look good, and they're going to be a better team than perhaps that second half performance showed yesterday. So, yeah, I'd be adding Bigsby's worth a few fab bucks adding on because he's got a flex-worthy role with upside if something was to happen to ETN. So that's one player I would definitely be adding to waiver wires. Another one's Justice Hill. There is a clear usage and utilization for him out wide. They don't have a traditional slot receiver. He's going to pick up some carries, maybe with some catches out there along with Likely. Is it a high volume role? No, but again, he has this flex worthy role with upside. He's 3.4% owned, so he's going to be available in a huge cheaper leagues as well. So he's another player you could absolutely jump on and take advantage if there was a situation to Derrick Henry. Other players who are in a very, very similar sort of boat there is Bucky Irving of the Buccaneers. He had 60-odd yards yesterday. He is slightly more owned, 20.8% owned. But again, he's going to have a very bit part role, but they're putting in these designed, schemed runs. He's got Chris Godwin blocking for him. He's got other players blocking for him to open it up, and they're going to give him the ball late in games where they've got a lot of control. They should win a lot of their early games. They've got a lot of games down the stretch in the fantasy playoffs weeks as well, where they have some winnable games. And Bucky Irving is a good stash ad here. He's worth a few percent of fab. He is on people's radars, so you might need to go and jump in quick. And if something was to happen to Rachaad White, the Buccaneers have shown they're going to commit to the run. They are going to run this ball a lot this year. So there's going to be room for Bucky Irving on a flex-worthy role with potential high upside later on there as well. Other players to sort of keep an eye on. I mean, the ones that I say are red flags and ones that I'm going to say don't invest in are players like Jamal Williams. People are going to look at Jamal Williams' usage yesterday and go, oh, well, he's someone who's got to be out. He had 11 carries. But the game was done. They pretty much just decided to bring him in just to sort of carry some water in a loss. Like again, the win. They're up 4 or 5 scores by the time he was really kind of getting some heavy usage there. So he's a player that is absolutely not on my radar at all, but you might hear that everywhere. And this is the difference between kind of box score scouting and watching the games. Most of his utilization came late on in that game when the game was all said and done. So you got your traditional candidates. If you're struggling, you've got players you need to sort of bring in. Look for those players who could usurp into a big role. Trey Sermon, Will Shipley, Emmanuel Wilson. Emmanuel Wilson's probably a good one to highlight here, 1.2% owned. With Jordan Love missing time, Malik Willis, not going to be an answer we would expect there. So they might run the ball a lot more. And Emmanuel Wilson, especially with Marshawn Lloyd out, they might want to run the ball a lot more. So Emmanuel Wilson, 1.2% is worth a cheeky intrigue to see what happens there with him. Let's look at the wide receivers now. And the wide receivers this week that you probably need to keep a good eye on. The first one is Alec Pierce. He is 0.4% owned. What we saw yesterday is not something you're going to see every week. It's not something you're going to see very often, but he is a player that I think you do need to keep an eye on, because what I would say to that is he did get those 3 targets, which wasn't a lot, but for 125 yards and a touchdown. And Josh Downs is going to come in. He is going to dilute this wall a little bit. He's kind of what you would call this like desperation play. If things just you're short on players and you need like a high upside chaos player who could break you a week in a game where you're projected to lose quite significantly, he's a player that you can have. He's not a player you rely on every week, so I wouldn't spend a lot of fab on him, purely $1 to $2. And he's sort of the ultimate boom or bust option here on the waiver wire this week. Wan'Dale Robinson is the complete opposite of that if you're looking in a PPR league for some security and someone you can put in your flex who's just going to score you some points. Wan'Dale Robinson is that. He's 6.9% owned. He got 12 targets yesterday. It wasn't a big stat line, but he still got 58 scrimmage yards. He got 6 catches. He got a run. He got a huge target share. 32% target share. It's a huge amount. And yeah, Daniel Jones stinks and all of these sorts of vibes coming out. But ultimately, he has got a significant amount of upside and safe floor because of all those targets. So he's a player that absolutely should be picked up off waiver wires and is worth a good few percent of fab there. I'd say 3 to 5% of fab is good for Wan'Dale Robinson in a PPR league. Obviously, in the other leagues like half point or standard, he's worth significantly less because you're going to need the yardage to really kick in. But in a PPR, 4-point PPR league, 6 catches, 8 catches, those are the kind of things you'd expect from him every week. Getting to double-digit points is really easy when you're getting that kind of volume. Start with some of the higher-owned players. Raheem Shaheed scored a touchdown yesterday. It was a good matchup. It's a bit boom or bust. He is available in 42% of leagues. He was surprisingly dropped in a lot of leagues last week, and he was a player I highlighted in my Fantasy Pros matchups column as a player you should be starting this week in the flex because he had a great matchup. They got a couple of good matchups early, New Orleans, so he's a player I would definitely be having. For a more safety point, Khalil Shakir is just under that 50% owned. He's 49.8% owned. He got in the box yesterday with a touchdown. He's going to get good utilization in that slot until they kind of work out what they're going to be doing, especially in games they're controlling. They didn't have control of that game yesterday. In higher control games, I think those targets will go up quite substantially. I think in terms of that, Demarcus Robinson's a player you need to keep an eye on, 14.8% owned. If Puka Nacua is going to miss time, Demarcus Robinson is a guy who's going to benefit from that quite substantially. So he is a player I absolutely would be picking up. And Rashad Bateman, he's 7.1% owned. He has a clearly defined role, 5 targets. I think that role will increase slightly. That was a tricky game and a tricky game script. I think he'll have games where he'll get a bit more targets as well. So there are players that I would be looking to add to rosters just for a couple of percent of fab. I don't think you need to go crazy. But Robinson, you might have to pay a little bit more as a premium if Nacua is out. And he's a player that will slot in the flex almost immediately. Rashad Bateman is a player I don't think you need to pay more than a couple of percent of fab. Players to keep an eye on. I wouldn't necessarily add them right now, but they're players I absolutely would be keeping an eye on. One of them is Luke McCaffrey from Washington. He's 6% owned. Now, he got 3 targets today in slot. He almost scored a touchdown. That would have been eye-opening to a lot of people who got stopped just short of the goal line. But the other thing I think is interesting about him, again, I don't think I'd add him, is there was a couple of times there was one play in particular where it looked like they went for the gadget play and he was going to throw the football. Jane Daniels doesn't look like he's ready to throw a deep ball. Not in the NFL yet. And I think Luke McCaffrey's a guy that they're thinking he can throw a deep ball. He was a former college quarterback before he switched to wide receiver. So he has experience. He knows how to throw the football. I expect for some of these trick gadget plays, as well as also some high utilization out of slot of Chris. We know what Cliff Kingsbury, he's kind of a bit of a goofy. He will do some weird things. I think you'll see Luke McCaffrey pull off some gadget plays, and I think you're going to see a little bit more out of him. Another player I'd watch and not necessarily add is Jalen McMillan out of the Buccaneers. He's 3.1% owned, and he's a really interesting player to add in the sense of he only got 1 catch yesterday, but it was for the touchdown. But they have clearly defined roles where, again, they searched for him a few times. One, he dropped a certain touchdown early in the first half. They went back to that play, and that's what he scored on. But there's definitely some routes that he does that no one else can do. He's a player that absolutely you should be keeping an eye on him and putting on your wish list. I don't think he's necessarily someone you need to pick up at this stage, but I think if you see similar things and improvements next week, he's one you keep an eye on. Another one potentially, if you're desperate for a flex-worthy ad, is Josh Reynolds. He is just 1.7% owned. It looks like he's going to be one of the main targets in that Denver offense. And don't sleep on Bo Nix. Bo Nix can sling the ball. He looked reasonably good yesterday at times. And, he got 8 targets yesterday, Josh Reynolds. So he's another player you need to keep an eye on in league. So make sure you do that. Moving on to the tight ends, the big talking point of the week is going to be Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely absolutely dominated, and 9.5% owned, and he is someone that people add. Now, I talked about this on Friday. I think you've got to add him. You've got to add him. Of course you do. Pay 5% of fab for him. If you need, the tight end position is garbage. Okay. Like at the end of the day, we saw it yesterday. There's not that many premium tight ends scoring that many premium points. So the opportunity to add someone like Likely is there, and is worth exploring. Don't get carried away. I still think Andrews is the guy long term, and I still think he is going to be that guy. But if we get some games where they're looking to do things out of the box, where they're not going to dominate, where they're going to play from behind, then we can see Likely getting into these sort of wide roles, covering a bit of the slot, getting out there, making plays. And I think it's and especially maybe deep on going into games where they're trailing and looking at getting extra men in the end zone. He is definitely a player that fits all of those capabilities. So he's one you should absolutely be thinking of adding. I wouldn't go for broke on him. You're going to see people probably put 10, 20% of fab on that. I think he's going to have some weeks that they're going to be quite poor. I think he's I still think Andrews is the guy I'd rather own. I wouldn't panic on Andrews. But for that chaos, if you're starting players like Cole Kmet and Taysom Hill and players like near the bottom, they're the ones that, you should absolutely I'll start likely and see what happens. There'll be some people calling out for Chicken Kwankwu. Yeah, he scored a touchdown yesterday, but that's all he did. There wasn't much else there. There really isn't any other sort of tight end pickup. Juwan Johnson's usage wasn't too bad. He scored a touchdown yesterday. He had 3 targets coming back from injury. He is 14.8% owned. He is a player you can sort of explore. I think he's a tight end too, but he'll have weeks where he can get a touchdown, and a player you should consider, because I think that usage will increase significantly. But they're really the only two. And then we come on to special teams and defense. And there's 2 for me. The Texans this week, they're 15.2% owned. They had a really good week against the Colts in their matchups. Definitely get a bit easier as well this week. So I think, I'm looking at the Texans and thinking that is an ad that just makes a lot of sense with the Bears, with Caleb Williams. Sunday night football, time to recover. They could really ratchet up on the Bears. And Caleb Williams, I know he didn't turn the ball over yesterday, but there was a few times it was pretty close. And they contained him pretty well, Tennessee. And I think the Houston Texans D is a bit better than that. And I think that's a situation that can easily be exploited. Another one is the Chargers. Talked about them last week. I think you've got them. I think you've got them another time, basically, with the Panthers. Panthers are the worst team in football. They were shocking yesterday. I mean, I have no words for how bad that was. I'm going to talk about it on shows this week, but they were abysmal. I mean, and there's no other word for it. Like, I knew they weren't good, but I didn't think they were that bad, and they're honestly tragic. So, eat out, because there's gonna be points galore for the Chargers DST this week. So enjoy that. That's going to cover it for this week. The other thing is, people are going to rush out and make loads of bids on Chris Boswell because he kicked 6 field goals. I mean, if you want to waste your fab, that's fine. He's not putting up another performance like that anytime soon. That was just a really weird game. So if you want to go and blow all your fab on Chris Boswell, then or Chris Boswell, then chin up. Good luck to you, but I'd save your money. Really, in most leagues, that's not going to be a big difference maker for you. Yeah, it paid off last week with Jeremy Fairbairn as well, but yeah, I wouldn't expect that going forward. So save your money on that. But that will do it. I'll be back later. I'm going to do a bit of an extra show, sort of a bonus. And then, we'll start getting ready for week 2 after tonight's game. So thanks for everything. Thanks for tuning in. Good luck this week. And I look forward to seeing you across the channel all week. And don't forget, as always, keep rushing.